Vitriol. Visite interiora terrae rectificando in Vinis occultum lapidem. This is the vitriol formula. It's Latin. It's an acronym for basically visit the interior of the earth, find and rectify the philosopher's stone. It's a classic formula. It appears in the Crowley deck in the tarot card, the art. I was going to say Aeon art card. It appears all over the place, and it's a very key thing within alchemy. Very commonly misunderstood, and it has multiple interpretations. So any alchemists out there will probably look at this video and go, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah, it's probably true. The problem about alchemy is that it's much like computer technology. These days, we look at the mind. We understand human experience, and we understand psychology and many other things in the world through the current metaphor of IT. So NLP, for example, neuro-linguistic programming. The mind is a biocomputer. That goes back to the 60s. The mind is a biocomputer. It can be programmed and reprogrammed. We have bad programming, bad software. We can update, upgrade ourselves, etc., etc. IT stuff is our current way of interpreting phenomena. Essentially, throughout the ages, there's always been the latest sort of scientific thing that becomes the operating metaphor of the culture by which to understand things. Now, back in the day, pre-chemistry, before chemistry then broke into all sorts of physics, all sorts of branches like physics, biology, and so forth. Essentially, alchemy was the all-encompassing technological understanding. And so it was adopted by both operating alchemists. Bearing in mind, look at the world of NLP, operating alchemists, some of them would have been idiots, probably quite a lot of them, and some of them would actually have been quite authentic. People flock to whatever the prevailing thing is, the latest thing, especially when there's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You can turn lead into gold. It attracts every charlatan, every nutcase known to man. So you had lots of people who were operating alchemists, some of whom may have known what they were doing, and most people probably didn't. And then you had all of the pop psychology type thing going on, where people adopting alchemical terms, thinking they understand what it means. But of course they know nothing. Take the modern day conspiracy stupid people, for example, who will take, everything, big pharma, medicine, doctors, they don't want to create cures, they just want to create customers. Yeah, they're coming from an emotive position of prejudice. And sure, they have a point to a degree, but that's the prevailing notion that they will have of the entire medical field and everyone that works within it. Would have had the same thing all the way through human experience. So the problem is that so much stuff that got spoken of, written and published about alchemy, most of it's rubbish. Today, an awful lot of people have studied that material that was published and is probably rubbish, but don't really understand which is sort of the more legit end and which isn't. And so we have the pop psychology mentality of alchemy as well. It's leaked into the modern fields of therapy and psychology generally, personal development. We're seeing alchemical hypnosis, alchemical business formulas. Basically, throw the word alchemy in there, and it sounds very sort of meaningful and mystical. But you can be sure the person who's done that has never studied the field. So alchemy is many, many things to many, many different people. And this is one of the problems in talking about it. It's why previously I very rarely have ever mentioned my own experiments and my own sort of interests in alchemy over the years. Because the problem I've always had was the moment I mentioned alchemy, oh dear God, oh, you're trying to turn lead into gold, are you? Ha ha ha. Trying to make your fortune? Ha ha ha. Oh, you don't believe in that stuff, do you? Ha ha ha. Hopeless. It's much like if you mention the tarot, everyone thinks, oh, you're telling the future, are you? Can you tell the future? It's hopeless. So I tend not to really talk about this particularly much outside of the groups of people that I study with and have studied with in the past. So, vitriol formula. It's visit the interior of the earth, find and rectify the philosopher's stone. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's in there. First of all, we have to find and rectify. What does that mean? Well, find it and purify it. Rectification is the purification thereof. Now, the philosopher's stone is the mythical substance which, like the Holy Grail, no one can really understand or decide what it actually is. The Holy Grail is many, many different things to many traditions and many different people. The philosopher's stone is the same. The stone of the wise, the elixir of life. Now, You touch it to a wound, it heals the injury. You consume it in a small amount, it can either kill you, because it's probably highly toxic, or it will give you everlasting life. It can make you wise, it can give you enlightenment. It can basically touch it to some lead, transforms to gold. It's an amazing substance. It is basically the end result of the alchemical process. The ability to have the control and power of matter and life itself. That is ultimately the spiritual quest. Christianity offers everlasting life. Everlasting, basically, beatific, whatever the word is. Everything is perfect. Everything is fine now. All suffering is lost. All reality is lost. And now you just live in this beatific state the whole time. The Philosopher's Stone pretty much has the same thing. It is the end result of a lengthy philosophical process. Now, some people will actually interpret this as a literal substance, and there's all sorts of people. Look on various alchemy forums. There's all sorts of people who claim to have created it. Not seeing much evidence for it, admittedly, but they will say, no, this is a very real thing. There's plenty of people. Comte Saint-Germain is the person who's lived forever because he invented it himself, developed it, and he's got it, and that's why he's 10,000 years old and he lives forever. All the stories abound. And you'll find similar stories across different cultures and different traditions as well. So the Philosopher's Stone is either seen as a genuine thing as a result of physical, chemistry experiments, or it's seen as a metaphor for psychological and spiritual developments. Two schools of thought, often they overlap, and often they are at loggerheads with each other. Now, if you look at people like William Hauck, Hauck, incredible man, he is a practical metallic alchemist. So he works with physical substances. He will claim that all of these alchemical processes are literal. They are not metaphorical. They're not spiritual. However, the analysis of these things take you into spiritual contemplations. And there's plenty of other people like Jung who will say these are entirely psychological concepts. There is a third, which is very popular, which I find quite compelling, but I also think it's still metaphorical in terms of it's the psychological, spiritual stuff, and it's basically alchemy as a sex manual. The elixir of life. There are plenty of traditions that will utilize this metaphor and actually take it to a literal position. The Ordo Templi Orientis is one of these, one of many, many organizations that will teach this kind of stuff. The elixir of life basically being the fluids that give rise to new life. Basically, the male juices and the lady juices mingling together to create life itself. The ultimate alchemical process is the creation and control of life, and therefore humans and basically all living creatures are able to do that. As my good friend Jim says, nature has a lot of sex, and I think that's probably the best analysis, that's the word, of the whole field. Nature has a lot of sex. Essentially, when you mix the right things together, life is created. Now, can humans artificially create the correct conditions to do that? Yes, according to alchemy. And that's where we create the homunculus. There are some fantastic videos. It was quite a few years ago now. YouTube, there was a bit of a flurry. A couple of Russian guys, they did an amazing job of basically injecting their own sperm, into an egg, hatching it, and then giving rise to creatures. Very, very convincing illusion that they created. I know how it's done. I've seen the analysis of it. And lots of people then replicated all sorts of experiments. A lot of people believe they were real and basically did inject their sperm into eggs. Doesn't really work. You just get a rotten egg. Very convincing. Now, the homunculus is the little man, the little creature that's given rise to once we've got control of the right conditions. Now, that's not really the Philosopher's Stone, but it's the elixir of life aspect, which is often interpreted as the Philosopher's Stone. Now, an awful lot of people in alchemy would suggest that it's all a sex manual, and the fountain of youth. Think about it. The fountain of youth that basically spews forth little youth things. Yeah, there's a lot there, and there's a lot of books written on it. And I've got to say, I find it very compelling. I think the majority of alchemists weren't thinking that, though. It's just that there's a lot of parallels, because when we're taking the metaphor of nature and then creating new metaphors from that, they're very analogous to any sex metaphors that we might come up with. Anyway, moving on quick. So the Philosopher's Stone is the thing we have to go and find and basically purify it. The Philosopher's Stone is within the prima materia, the prime matter, the first matter, the matter from which things emanate from. And that's where the vitriol formula goes into a number of things. There's lots of overlap, which I'll get into as we go. So the symbolism, the classic vitriol symbol, is of the green lion holding the sun in its mouth. Now, the green lion is the substance itself, the vitriol substance. Often it's referred to as oil of vitriol, and this is largely sulfuric acid, although there's different combinations that it can come with. Sulfuric acid either with iron salts or with various other acids too. Nitric and sulfuric mix will give you acaricea. That was often referred to as vitriol. Now, this is extremely potent acid that will pretty much dissolve everything. Oh, it dissolves everything except gold. So if we take any rock, like quartz, for example, that has veins of gold running through it, and drop it into vitriol, into a very strong acid, it will dissolve absolutely everything away except for the gold itself. It's a basic way of gold extraction. It's costly, and it's very messy, it's very dangerous, and highly polluting. However, it demonstrates the principle. We can separate the pure from the impure. That's how it's seen. The green lion is the chemical, is the acid itself. The sun is representative of gold. Every metal is attributed to a planet. For example, iron is Mars, Venus, copper, the moon is silver, and so on. And gold is to the sun. So in alchemy, whenever you see the sun, that is both the sun, the solar principle, the life-giving force, the masculine principle, and so forth, it is also gold. Depending on the context in which it's displayed, it may be all those things. Adam McLean is the guy, my go-to. His website is astonishing. I'll put a link in the description. Adam McLean, you'll find him on Facebook as well, is possibly the #1 archivist of all of the alchemical symbols and what they refer to, what they mean. His website is astonishing. He's got lots of courses on there. I do highly recommend his work as well. So, essentially, the gold, the sun, the purity, the pure principle is present within the rock, which is the base stuff and the contaminant, the dross. And using this particular formula, we can separate the two. Now we have the metaphor, which is instead of going into the ground, into a mine, digging out the gold vein, dropping in the acid to separate out the two, being left with the gold, getting rid of all the dross, we can go deep within ourselves, look within ourselves, and then we can basically find the gold within, the sun within, and get rid of all the crap. And we basically become a pure being. We are the base matter, and we are purifying ourselves to become the solar or the gold matter. That's the metaphor. Now, there's lots of other stuff that goes with this. Within Christianity, there's a very similar principle. It comes from, I believe it's in the book of John. I might need to just go and check that one. Which is essentially between the crucifixion of Christ and the resurrection. It's ambiguous. Was it 48 hours or 72? Not quite sure. Was it 2 days or 3 days? It varies according to who you talk to. But anyway, in that intermediate time, Christ descended into hell and he brought salvation to the dead. There's just one little line in the New Testament that gives that. Now, there's something important to understand about that one line. In ancient Christianity, or the early Christianity, there was no heaven and hell that you went to when you died. No one believed that. That's a very modern thing, that when you die, you're with Jesus now. No, that's a very new thing. In biblical times, and really up until about 1000 AD, when you died, you went into the ground, where you waited for Judgment Day. And on Judgment Day, basically, this is what's revealed in Revelations, you either go up or you go down. Judgment Day is where it's at. So you don't die and go to heaven. Now, you have to understand that as a key thing, because there's a bit that Christians miss within the New Testament story of the crucifixion, which is the two criminals being crucified beside Christ on the day of whatever it's called. where he basically where one says, "Oh, he's a fucking arsehole," and the other goes, "No, we deserve our fate, not this good man. He's a good man. You will join me." Well, he didn't say that. He had his arms nailed. "You will join me tonight on the right-hand side of God up in heaven." There we have direct bypass from having to wait in the ground to the judgment day. We have somebody who is actually transported straight up to the heavens. It doesn't happen very often. Enoch was pretty much the only other one. Enoch then became Metatron in the Jewish tradition. Something to look up. Now, the principle from the book of John is then elucidated in the Gospel of Nicodemus. Another thing to understand, the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, incorporated into the Bible. There were dozens and dozens of other Gospels that were written that could have been included. Christians, for some reason, refuse to read those because the non-canonical Christian texts are heretical. Well, they could have been included. For example, you go to the Ethiopia, they have the Book of Enoch is included in their Old Testament that no other country has. And it makes sense to include it because it completes the missing bit in the book of Genesis. Noah's Lot, basically, God destroys the earth, Noah and his family get saved, and then it jumps after they arrive in Ararat when the water has receded, and suddenly they're marrying into the families of other people and the lads. Well, hang on, everyone died. Well, it's because the Book of Enoch's missing. So it jumped. The chronology isn't correct. A lot of these other Gospels that were written around about the same time as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, could have been included. Now, the Gospel of Nicodemus, also known as the Harrowing of Hell, is a lot later. And this is the elucidation or the elaboration of the story of Christ descending into hell, having been judged by Pontius Pilate, and basically bringing salvation to the dead. In this particular metaphor, Christ is the solar principle. He's the solar principle. The light being taken down into the dark. There's the gold into the earth, in order to bring illumination and enlightenment. In this vein, that puts Christ as what's called a psychopomp. Now, another little bit of history for you. The imagery of Christ was basically adopted from the imagery of Hermes. Hermes was also a psychopomp. He was pretty much the good shepherd. That's where the good shepherd bit comes from. Lots of sheep imagery and fish with Hermes. Hermes, one of his principal functions, as well as healing the sick and all of the things that pretty much are attributed to Christ, also guided the souls of the dead in the underworld, basically to show them to the right place. So they wouldn't pop back up again, because it gets very awkward when the dead keep coming back. And so they were guided to the appropriate place. So Hermes regularly descended into hell in order to take people and basically take them as a god, not a demon, as a god, into the underworld in order to wait for whatever that particular mythology then had at the end. A lot of that imagery got translated across to Christ. The Gospel of Nicodemus continues that tradition and places Christ as somebody who goes into the underworld in order to pretty much do the same function as Hermes did. Slurpity. So, to that extent, what we now have are a tradition of gods, solar gods, going into the underworld, which actually follows on from pretty much what we had from the ancient Egyptians, where they had recognized that you had the sun coming up one side of the horizon, traversing across the sky, dropping down the other side, going through the underworld, under the world, going through the underworld and popping up the other side the following day, and round it goes. That's a pretty interesting observation, that they recognize that the sun goes somewhere at night. Think about it. We take these things for granted these days, but people had to work out the physics and the cosmology of what was actually going on, of what they saw. And they had long since recognized that the sun is not going around the earth, it's the other way around. That's a long standing thing. And they also knew the world wasn't flat. They had pretty accurately measured it. So we have that many of those traditions still appear within modern day religion. It's just that it's not interpreted as such. People take the story slightly differently because they're missing the additional information, I would say, from all the other books that were written. One last little thing that we also have analogous to the vitriol formula, and this is the other concept within, or one of the other concepts within alchemy, of putrefaction. also known as the Nigredo. Now, the Nigredo is the blackening. In early, was it 1800s, 1900s Christianity, this was reimagined as the long, dark night of the soul. When the person is in a position where all hope is lost, despair comes to visit, the world seems black and full of despair, and basically a person has reached the limits of their capacity to live the way they've been living. I saw this quite a lot in psychiatry. I went through this myself pretty much at age 28. I had this. This was my long dark night of the soul at 28 years old. The worst experience I could ever imagine, and I survived it and came out of it a much better person. It's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. One of the problems with modern day psychiatry and therapy is many people never get to go for breakthrough. Essentially, they're a shitty person and they're living in the inside of the head in a really shitty way. They're not being honest with who they are to themselves or with the world. They're living a persona. And eventually the resources to maintain that persona get depleted and they can't do it anymore. They see therapists, they see psychiatrists, they get medicated, they get therapy, they get support, and they get to carry on being the same persona they were before. For myself, my experience at 28 was that never happened and I was on my own. And essentially I was then confronted with the reality of myself. This was a long dark night of the soul, which lasted about 6 months of tears and despair. And if I was younger, I'd probably gone into self-harm and that kind of stuff. So essentially what we have is the reckoning. You either die or you let who you are die and the true self start to emerge. And that's what started to happen for myself. It took a long time. It wasn't an overnight thing at all. It was years in the making. But essentially, I transformed as a human being to no longer recognize the person I was prior to 28 years old. Thankfully. This is the long dark night of the soul. Now, in putrefaction, this is the Nigredo. Essentially, there are two aspects of putrefaction. The Nigredo aspect is where we burn the materials that we're working with to a black substance. You may have separated them out beforehand, and then they all get mixed up, and then alchemical processes are enacted. And so essentially the dross matter is burnt away. In sort of more organic side of stuff, this is the rotten stuff. This is where everything is rotten. Totally, totally rotten. So rotten that it used to be organic matter that was alive. Now it's not alive, and it actually becomes anti-life. The analogy that's used here is swamps. Black swamp that's sulfurous, generally nothing can survive in it. You plant seeds in it, it won't grow. But if you wait long enough, what starts to happen is a spirit gets released. It's an oil, and it causes like a rainbow on top of the water. This is the peacock feather or the rainbow. At that point, that matter is now ready to support life and things will grow within it. And so the putrefaction is complete. And it has gone from being alive to being dead to being more than dead. It's now anti-life. Transformation, now it supports life again. And I'll put some links to various bits and pieces where you can actually test this out for yourself experimentally. We did that here a few years ago. I've still got the jars out in the garden here, and they look like a rainbow. If I can find the pictures, I'll post them up here. We see the same thing with, again, in Christianity and Judaism, with Noah's Ark story in Genesis. So essentially, the world is rotten. God decides he's going to kill everything. A small number of people allowed to survive. The world is purified. And then life starts again. Oh, and at the end of it, there's the covenant from the Lord of the rainbow that says, this will never happen again. I messed up. I don't wish to kill everyone again. Yeah, he did a lot of that in the Old Testament. Devil never killed anybody, but God killed them all. Yeah. So that's a very common thing within alchemy, is the rainbow, the peacock feather, and so forth. So that's the putrefaction, Nigredo, vitriol, and they all kind of link up when you study the symbolism. And I recommend you look up all of these things to study. So now, how does this apply to personal mental health and therapy? Simple. Allow the rottenness to continue to rot, and find within that the truth. The truth would be the gold. It's the gold seam within the rock, within the dross. Allow the rottenness, the dross, to basically be discontinued. They don't have to maintain it. They can actually stop doing that and allow the purity, the divine truth, their true essence, their core self within, their life force to start to emerge. And essentially, the vitriol formula is the formula for transformation. Transformation is talked about a lot in alphabet therapies, and it drives me nuts. Because most of what I see about personal transformation is egotistical indulgence and covering up the nonsense with deception, lies, fake it till you make it. You end up in a Kevin Lay situation where we have lots of individuals in the personal development NLP world who are basically portraying themselves to be godlike beings. Just look at the culture around Richard Bandler. Now, I spent time around Richard Bandler. I think he's a great guy. I don't know him personally. I don't know if those who know him personally would consider him to be a great guy. However, my impression of him is he knows what he is. He knows what he is. A bit like Sam Vaknin. He knows what he is. Would you describe them as good people? It depends on which receiving end you're on the end of. But essentially they know what they are. But if you look at the community of people around them, they herald people like Bandler to be a god. Everyone has to describe him as a genius. Everyone has to refer to him as Dr. Bandler. Basically, they're bigging up. So he's this mighty being who's an absolute genius. He can do anything. He can heal the sick. He can raise the dead. He can't. He's just a man like everybody else. But a mythology emerges around them. That is the persona. That persona is what people buy into and then want to bid off for themselves. They are basically creating more dross, more falsity, more bullshit, and they surround themselves by that. And if they can believe it strongly enough, then I can be happy too. I can be the success story. And you only have to meet these people and think, okay. When people become enlightened, when people undergo a true transformation, what do they look like? They look like just like they did before. As a friend of mine says, and this is probably a famous saying, I don't know. What did we do before enlightenment? Fetch water and chop wood. What do we do after enlightenment? Fetch water and chop wood. But a lot of people seem to think that once they're enlightened, once they have made a personal transformation, then they basically become grandiose, affluent, wealthy, and everything works for them. They don't have to work for a living themselves. They don't have to put effort in. Everything's effortless. I've met those people. I've been around those people. I've worked behind the scenes with those people. They're idiots, and they're not successful, and most of them are high or intoxicated most of the time. I can say that. I've seen it. I've been there. So I don't believe the bullshit when NLPers and personal development talk about personal transformation. I'm not seeing any evidence of that taking place. What I'm seeing is ego indulgence and egotistical self-importance. That's not really the same thing. One of the problems about transformation as well is people think of grandiosity. I've got to be seen by everyone else to be important. I will have made it. I will be transformed. I will be the thing, when everyone basically worships me like a god. And that's basically narcissism there and then. And when I look at people like Bandler and so forth, I say, yep, this is narcissism being played out beautifully. And they're finding themselves all the codependent sycophants and surround themselves with that. Now, I don't mean that to be dismissive of Bandler's work or what the field of NLP has achieved and so forth. But I am talking about what happens within a field or a community of people when people mistake the behaviors they're seeing for enlightenment, transformation, and so forth, because that is not what is happening. Most people who in the various orders I've been over the years, the people I've seen who I've been most impressed by, who have seemed to have actually made that enormous shift and transformation themselves, they actually disappear. They don't become famous. They don't become egotistical people. They basically don't need any of that anymore. They just get on with their lives. And they go about their work and their assistance to the community quietly. They're not having to do a virtue signal every time they give to charity, a virtue signal every time they do something positive or there's a world event, they're going to change their Facebook status to support it. Most of them just quietly go about their lives. The exact antithesis to the whole world of NLP. So vitriol formula is to find something that is basically going to burn away the dross. It's a lengthy process. It doesn't always feel good. It's not always very nice. and a lot of people have to confront some very, very unpleasant truths of themselves. I know I did. And it's sometimes so painful to confront the stuff, you have to go, might leave that one for now. We'll deal with some of the other things first to get myself in a better state to be able to handle it. Because in order to approach the devil, the metaphor, if we take it, you have to approach it like a god. If you approach the devil like a broken human being, you're going to get suckered in. If you start to actually make yourself a little bit better, a little bit more divine, again, using the metaphor, a little bit more solar, a little bit more gold, which, remember, doesn't get burnt down. It stays true. Build that up first. You can get closer and closer to dealing with the darkest aspects of the self. Therapists and coaches, one of the things they do is they don't stage and stagger their change work processes. They try, especially the NLPers, they try and do it all in one go. They try and make it happen in a single session. Oh, we can just do a swish pattern and it all deals with all of that stuff. Oh, a 6-step reframe fixes everything. Oh, I use anchoring and empowering questions. Oh, sliding anchors. They're idiots. I have no other way to put that. These are people who they have no idea what they're talking about and no idea what they're doing. And largely it's just an indulgence. From where I am now in life and in my own sort of personal explorations of myself, I'm appalled. I've always been pretty much appalled by coaches and therapists, but as time goes on, I get more and more appalled. Simply because then there's no initiation, there's no preparation of the client in order to deal with the changes that they're being subjected to. Now, I'm not talking about getting rid of a phobia. I'm not talking about alleviating simple little things like anxiety and stuff like that. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Transformational work is what I'm talking about. There is so much of it spoken about and very little of it practiced. Now, with that in mind, using the word transformation, the Connie Ray Andreas's core transformation process, Connie Ray and Tamara Andreas's core transformation process, is a genuine transformational process. If you understand the formula of vitriol and generally the different precepts of alchemy, and then look at Connie Ray's and Tamara's model, it's astonishing. You'll also see it parallel with the Goetia magical workings as well. Now, when I put that to Tamara and Connie Ray, they're horrified because they haven't studied alchemy. They don't know the Goetia. It's like, are you sure? I gave Mark Andreas a copy of the Goetia. I said, Mark, study this. You'll be amazed. This is core transformation right there. I'm not sure it is, Andy. I understand, simply because the metaphors can be quite abstract. They stack and they overlap on each other. And so it's quite a complex area. But the core transformation process, I believe, is a true alchemical transformational process. It's not the only one, but it's certainly the most superior that's come out of the NLP field. Right, I think that's probably all I've got on this one. If you have any thoughts, comments, or questions on the vitriol, any further things you want me to talk about, stick it in the comment section and I'll see what I can come up with. Oh, please click the like button. Always appreciated.